got a Mastodon instance that you just set up and found yourself thinking after a couple of days, man, this uses a lot of resources. This is going to cost me more than I thought it was. Originally it was supposed to be this price, but I'm going to have to buy all this extra storage and then it's going to be too expensive. Well, don't worry. Mastodon does not have to cost an arm and a leg, and what you're experiencing is very common. I went through it myself, and there are some very likely causes of you running into this issue. So let's go through how to fix this issue today. So the issue with storage is your cache. If we have a look here at Consultatron, we can see all of the things that it's following. It's following all these different users because Consultatron is interested in new clients, handshakes, and emotions. These are things that Consultatron has subscribed to. It's basically said, hey, anytime that Montreal transit status has an update, I'm interested, I want to see it. And so you can see that if I click on the Montreal transit status and I have a look at my address bar, it's on Consultatron, and that's because it's all been cached. It's all been brought in to the Consultatron Mastodon instance. The reason for this is varied, but I'd say the biggest one is to spread the burden of serving content to users. So imagine a situation where Consultatron is going to post this image, and for some reason, this just blows the fediverse's minds, and it gets reposted by every single person on the fediverse, and everyone's going to read it. This image file is sitting on our hosting, and it's fine to be fetched a few times by people, but if it went viral, it would be fetched by potentially millions of people, and it would bring our server down. So if I go over to my Mastodon instance, masto.canadiancivil, and I go and have a look, I see the image, but this image is actually stored on my instance, right? So what happens is when a post goes viral or gets a lot of shares, it doesn't bring down the server because everyone's sharing the burden of sharing a post and its media content. And for big instances like Mastodon.social with, say, 500,000 people, they just have one request to the original server, and then that same file is seen by all of those 500,000 users on the instance. So I think that's the primary reason for it. It's not like I was there for the original planning of it, but it's a huge benefit. So it's worthwhile doing, but it does have some catches. And the issue is you need to kind of make a decision about what you want to do with your media cache. So what you want to do with this is jump into your preferences, scroll down to administration, and scroll down to server settings, and you will see this page called content retention. And this is where you decide what you're going to keep. The first panel here is the media cache retention period. So that's the cache of the JPEG files, of the video files, of all these kind of like large things that are attached to a text post. With this, I think the default, if you leave it blank, is 14 days. I personally think that it doesn't need to be anywhere near that high, especially on a solo or small instance. For me, I use Mastodon each day, and if after a couple of days I haven't looked at a post, that means that I've moved on. I don't roll back through my timeline to see what happened last week. For larger instances, you might want to keep this because you may have users that just check out Mastodon every once in a while, or they go on holiday and they're out of internet and then they want to kind of go through and check things out. But remember, the media cache is not deleting the original files. They're still all there. People can go and see those posts. The posts will refetch if you do scroll way back in a timeline and it starts to kind of hit the edge of the cache retention period. So I personally think that this can be quite a lot lower. For me, 7 days on my own instance, if I haven't gotten to it in a week, I'm not going to get to it. The user archive retention period, this could be an issue on larger instances, although I'm assuming that you're a new instance owner. What this is the value for how long to keep the archive that's generated on this page. So this is an archive of the posts that the users made. So the image and the text for the posts that they have on their profile. And, people sometimes, click that and request their archive. And I could see a situation where a user with a particularly massive post history has gone and clicked on this, and the storage has been filled up with a big zip file. That's very much a kind of passing situation. But I don't know if you've notified users that you're going to be closing down the server. I guess that could be something that starts to cause you to hit your storage limits. But, it is just temporary. The last field here is very important. The remote content retention period. So this field here, the remote content retention period, this is where people get in trouble. It is not recommended to enter anything in this box, but I will explain what it does. So the media cache retention period, media is like the PNGs and the JPEGs and the video files. If the cache gets cleared, the media is still there on the original server, but obviously that's not everything that's in a post. If we have a look at, this Consultatron post, yeah, sure, there's the image, but this text is here as well. What about this alt metadata? What about information about the account that it came from? This is the content cache. This is the content that's going into a database and being stored on your server. The issue is if you go and you start deleting remote content, well, what if a user has replied to that post? What if they have interacted with it? What if it's favorited or saved? You run into issues when you start deleting remote content because it's almost like a record of anything that existed at all. So you can see here it says, this includes posts where a local user has marked it as bookmarks or favorites. Private mentions between users from different instances will also be lost and impossible to share. If you ran this and one of your users had been, sending messages to someone on another instance, like DMs, they would find themselves looking at a message chain where it just looks like they're talking to themselves, People just don't really expect this. So this is really only a thing that you should run if you know what you're doing and you're the only person on the instance and you're prepared to bear the consequences. For me, if I was on an instance, sending messages to someone and the admin decided to fill in this field, I would be quite irritated to see that my messages were a one-way conversation and I had now no record of what was said on the other side. So it's pretty dangerous. The primary cause I've found of people having an issue with the storage on their Mastodon instance. Relays. So if you have a look down here, this is where the relays are. And a lot of people, when they start a Mastodon instance, will read somewhere about relays because they're trying to solve this problem of a Mastodon instance that just doesn't have much on it. We actually have one here. Discount Bucket Warehouse, they have a brand new Mastodon instance. And if I go and look at Explore, there's nothing there. If I look at live feeds, there's just the one post that the Discount Bucket Warehouse has made. So what happens is the user signs up and they go, great, here I am, I've got my instance. And then they notice, oh, it turns out that when I was on another instance, a lot of the heavy lifting on hydrating my instance with content and suggestions was being done for me. And now that I'm on my own instance, that's all my job. How can I recreate that kind of busy timeline so I can see stuff to like and have that experience that I've grown accustomed to? The problem is these relays are an absolute fire hose of media cache filling and content cache filling stuff. Most relays are far, far beyond anything that a solo instance would want to have in its cache. I ran an experiment recently just with different kind of cache settings. I set up one cache experiment which just had an instance following 20 really busy accounts, like the 20 most popular accounts on the fediverse. Meanwhile, on another instance, same default settings, I added a pretty standard relay. After a couple of weeks, the Mastodon instance that was just following 20 busy accounts had filled up and was kind of resting around the 8.5 gigabyte mark, while the versions that had the relays set up were pushing over 60 gigabytes. In some instances with different kind of cache clearing settings, we were talking more like 90. And that's a huge increase in price. It's a huge consumption of resources, having to like suck in all that fire hose of content and push it into caches, Relays, they're just not a very good idea. And you may be like me, I discovered relays weren't a good idea after, a week of like, oh my God, this is going to be really expensive. So you may be thinking, oh, I'll just remove a relay, and you go in and you delete the relay from your admin panel. Over time, that content that the relay brought in, it will be cleared out. And, if you're on a service like FediHost, you just, downgrade your plan, change the storage and change it down to the lower plan, and you're right as rain. The problem is that the cache clearing doesn't clear out the content cache. It's just clearing out the media cache. The media cache, after, say, in this case, 7 days, that'll all be cleared out from the experience with the relay, lesson learned, and your storage will drop. The issue is that the relay could, especially if it's been on for a while, have filled up your database with lots and lots of text for all these different posts. And that's using database storage. It's a different sort of storage. It's a storage that costs more. It's not the worst. If you run it for a couple of days, it's not going to be a huge burden. But if you've been on a solo instance with a relay running for weeks, you might find yourself going, you know what? I don't really care that much about posts that I had liked or favorited. I don't have any private messages with anyone. And you might decide, if it all kind of makes sense, set this at like a low number, like 2 days, save it, give it 24 hours, come back here, remove it, save it again so that it's blanked out. And there may be a few minor consequences for stuff that predates that moment, but it will let you kind of roll your database back to where it originally started without having to migrate to a new instance or do anything like that. One thing to keep in mind is that you may not see those savings in your database immediately, because in order for most of that data to be freed up, a full vacuum needs to be run on the database. So if you're with a managed hosting provider and you don't want to wait around for the kind of routine maintenance that might only occur once every couple of months or a year, then you may want to send an email and request a full vacuum of the database. The reason for this is that a full vacuum will actually take down the instance for a while. So it's just not the sort of thing that your typical hosting provider will be doing on like a nightly or weekly basis. So relays, very common culprit, probably the majority of people who go, wow, this Mastodon thing costs way, way, way more than I thought. It's usually the relay. Now, if you want to know how to actually kind of handle this, there is a video I'll link to that I did on finding stuff in the fediverse. The long and short of it is nothing beats looking for stuff yourself, intentionally following it, finding hashtags, opening up other people's profiles and seeing who they're following their recommendations, and just generally putting in effort. Another solution is to add people to your server. The more the merrier with Mastodon. If you open it up and have a few friends and you're all looking around for stuff to follow, you will fill your server with content. You're kind of crowdsourcing it. If the people on your server are people that you like, they're probably, similar to you in values, and they'll help fill your server with stuff that's kind of tailored for your own community automatically. There are almost like second generation relay-like services coming in that let you filter by hashtag and discover stuff. There's the Fedi Discovery project. So there's a lot of like alternatives to going down the relay route. Relays, in my opinion, are something that you would look into if you were like, oh, I'm going to set up a really big community, like thousands of users, and I want to kind of fill it with a ton of content. You would potentially do that. But honestly, if you've got thousands of users, why not just let them fill the server with the content that they want? And in fact, I think the only time that I will ever be using relays is to generate load on servers when running experiments and tests for these actual tutorials. So that's managing your storage in Mastodon. It's actually pretty simple. You've got a couple of settings and a common error that people make. If you've run into issues with storage on Mastodon that I didn't cover, let me know in the comments, because I'd be happy to circle back and do this video again and talk about it a little bit more when we do the video on how to manage a Mastodon instance, which is coming up. But I hope that it helps, because honestly, I'd say that 90% of the clients that kind of talk about having too much in their storage, it's really simple. They've set their cache retention period too high, and they've gone and followed a relay.